Welcome guys to today's update. I will go over the flatting and 3-betting ranges. I made some major changes. In terms of the quantity, the ranges we had before were more a mix of exploitative and GTO plays. The ranges now are a little bit more GTO because in these days we have to understand that of course people catch up, solver tools are evolving, and getting more and more people will have access to these tools, of course, so their pre-flop game will be better. So at this point, I decided, okay, let's introduce a little bit more of a game theoretical approach into our ranges. However, don't worry, you will see I changed those ranges a lot. So in case you are working with a lot of solvers yourself, Monka solver, Pyro solver, you're scripting your own ranges or whatever you do, you will see that the ranges we have here are still slightly different than what most solvers are recommending. I will show you on some examples here in the ranges where I think it makes absolutely no sense to follow GTO because population plays completely different. They have a completely different approach, and of course I took that into consideration as well. So I'm not just blindly giving you the GTO ranges, which I think would be a huge mistake. Of course, you will be profitable, but you will not be as profitable as you can be. Let's start with 20 big blinds, by the way. We only going to, there's something I changed. So we're not going to cover 20 to 30 big blinds or 20 to 40 big blinds. No, it's only for 20 big blinds. I think it's way more user friendly. It's also way better sorry, for studying. So in case you want to learn the ranges, it's of course much easier to have only a few colors. You will later see when it gets a little bit more complex, we're a little deeper, then we need to use more colors for certain scenarios, but we tried to keep it as simple as possible. I think it's the best way to study and also to understand those ranges. Keep in mind, it's not only about studying them and learning them by heart. You need to try to understand those ranges. Right, so let's start with big blind versus UTG, and you will see that we start defending looser than we would normally do. It's basically because we're quite short. We have a way higher equity utilization than with 100 big blinds. And you will also see that we are rejamming some hands which you would probably not expect to rejam. So let's look into the numbers here using Hodem Resource Calculator. So as you can see here, for big blind versus under the gun and big blind versus MP, of course against MP, considering we face the min raise, we defend a little wider. And also you can see very similar pattern here. We rejam those suited Broadway hands, and especially against MP. I just want to show you the numbers real quick. You can see that rejamming those hands, King 9 suited, Jack 9 suited, or Queen 9 suited, yeah, Jack 9 suited, it's extremely profitable. It has, for 20 big blinds, around 10% of the EV of aces, which is quite good. You can see, and what most people do wrong is they keep rejamming those suited aces, and actually those hands have a way higher EV. And they benefit a lot from making our opponent fold hands like ace-10 off, or king-jack off, or king-queen off, or even hands like queen-jack suited. So and even if we get called, we always have still very reasonable equity. I consider that our opponent raises such a range, which I think is very reasonable, 22%. It's a little bit more on the tighter side. And he's calling it off like this. And even here, I would assume that some people might fold ace-10 off, some combos of pocket fives, and even some king-queen suited. I mean, king-queen suited probably not, but it's a little bit more on the looser side if we make it a little tighter. I mean, of course, you also get these players, or face those players that will call off some ace-9 suited, so pocket fours, but I think it's rather unrealistic. I think in the long run, it's more like this of a range. So I think that is quite decent. So, and you have the same here versus cutoff, and you see from big blind versus under the gun versus MP cutoff button, we want to rejam those hands, and the EV doesn't really change. It's always very, very profitable. And the reason why I want to rejam them those hands is that they still have good equity. And yeah, of course, you don't want to rejam the crap here. So here, and then versus big blind versus button, it's a little bit different. And then we might get called from king jack and queen jack suited. So we also then want to start reshoving king queen offs and king jack suited. Of course, king queen suited is also extremely profitable to rejam with, but the EV of flatting is slightly higher than reshoving. And we also flat a bunch of a6 hands. Don't get me wrong, if you are rejamming those hands, you're not doing a mistake. And you can also orientate on the rejamming ranges here. This will basically show you what hands you can prefer reshove. This does not show you what has a higher EV. This is very, very important, guys. This is something you need to understand. If you play against a very good opponent, you should stick to that. Stick to that range, so you can flat reasonably wide. You still have a lot of stronger hands in your range, right? The problem is if you are rejamming all these hands, aces and all the broadways, you're going to have a lot of problems post-flop, because you're going to be capped on a lot of board textures. Of course, with 20 because it's not that important, but it's still a little relevant. So keep that in mind. The rejamming ranges, if you're not sure, if you don't feel comfortable playing these offsuited aces post-flop, go ahead and rejam. It's still very, very profitable, especially if you play against weaker opponents that are not so aggressive or not taking into consideration that your range might be capped, all that kind of GTO quote-unquote bullshit in these kind of spots. So just go ahead and reshove. That's totally fine. Even hands like 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited, which usually should be flats, are fine hands to rejam with. If you check them in Hodemries's calculator, you will see the EV is very, very high. It's very profitable. I would say that you will find barely any hands that are slightly profitable. They always show at least a huge profit. But remember, we want to look for hands that have the highest possible EV, and that means for 20 big blinds here against button, then doing a bunch of flat calling and only jamming around 20% of our hands. If you want to do some 3-betting, it's going to be very difficult with 20 big blinds. I would start doing with 25 big blinds and more. If you play against someone that is opening ridiculously loose and he is opening a bunch of garbage, you can also just 3-bet to 5 big blinds, 5.5 big blinds against his min open. He will not be able to defend properly. We give ourselves a good price, and we only invest 1/4 of our stack, so we're not committed at all. Big blind versus small blind 3x. Okay, here I'm very sure some of you guys will be surprised. It definitely makes a lot of sense. I was also surprised at why. I will definitely incorporate that into my game as well. As you can still see here, we want to take advantage of our positional advantage, do as little reshoving as possible. Why? Because we have position, and we also want to have a bunch of stronger hands in our range. Our hands like aces, kings, queens, they don't need protection at all, jacks or tens. We're in position. I mean, of course, they need a little protection, don't get me wrong, but you will gain a massive EV playing in position against a polarized raising range. Also with a bunch of suited aces. Yes, I know that a lot of you guys have learned, and that's totally right. Don't get me wrong, it's totally right that usually you want to go in with stronger hands. However, with 20 big blinds, it's a little different. You will see that pattern over and over again. We go all in rather with stronger hands, but there are a few exceptions. And here, one of the exceptions is we want to shove these off-suited aces and just call with those suited aces. If some of you guys are doing, if you shove those suited aces, it's totally okay. I mean, it's printing a ton of money. Also, maybe we go back for that advice I'm going to give you here real quick. If you want to study and make exploitative plays and you don't know where to start from, you don't know what your opponent, what range you should use, you can always use the TMC ranges as something you can start from. And the most important thing here is that, let's say we go to 20 big blinds open raising. You see here we should be raising around 40%. And if you see someone is raising 45, 50%, you should definitely adjust from here. for the flooding 20 big blinds and reshove way more hands. So if someone is raising more than 40%, you should definitely reshove more hands here. Then king queen suited is becoming more profitable because our opponent is raised 40 more hands. If he's adjusting and calling looser, well, we don't mind. If he starts calling king 9 suited, queen jack suited, we really don't mind. But since he's raised folding so many hands, then we want to adjust and rejump more hands, and vice versa. If you play against a nit that only raises 32% of hands, I would probably just call king 10 suited. I would just call a6 suited, a7 off, and rejump a few hands tighter. Back to big blind versus small blind 3x. Here, if you want to have, it's actually a common league, that's why I incorporated that into the blind versus blind range here, that so many players are still raising too many hands from the small blind, and of course a counter attack would be reshoving a ton of hands, but I think working with small 3-bet bluffs is much better here, and since their range is so wide, we can neglect the playability a lot, and we should aim for having rather blocker hands and at least having some sort of top pair potential in case he calls us. So these kind of hands here would be decent hands to 3-bet bluff with, and if you face a min raise, remember guys, we call any two. It's not possible to fold even though we're 20 big blinds deep. And these are the hands we're jamming with. Very interesting, of course. And yeah, as I just mentioned, you're gonna push your overall EV with your entire range way more than just always reshoving. So try it out. You will see. And also the benefit of it is your opponent will never put you in such a range. I mean, you're gonna destroy your opponents in the blind battle. Something very uncommon, very unnatural. You don't need to shift 100% right away, but little by little, adding a few more of these overpairs and suited aces and suited broadways, which you usually would be rejamming with, start incorporating into your game, and little by little you will get used also. I mean, come on, playing in position 20 big blinds pocket jacks shouldn't be that difficult. Same for ace 9 suited, but of course it feels somewhat unnatural to us. Let's move over to button versus cutoff. And as you can see, I also tried to incorporate how to react against squeezes, which was missing so far, or most of the time missing. And we also do a bunch of trapping here with aces and kings, of course, makes a lot of sense. And it also gives us the advantage of still flatting reasonably wide. If aces and kings wouldn't be in your flatting range, you should probably flat call a little tighter. By that, you give your positional advantage away because you're going to defend your button way less. So even hands like queen jack off, king 10 off, we can flat call 10-8 suited, king 8 suited with 20 big blinds, which I think a lot of players are not doing at all. If you want to exploit your opponent and he's opening too many hands, again here, how do you recognize if someone is not, or let's say you recognize someone as you could potentially exploit. You go to the 20 big blinds ranges, you see, oh, this is what we're supposed to open raise from the cutoff, 33% hands, and you will find those opponents a lot that are playing 35, 37, or even 40% from the cutoff. And the best and powerful counter attack is to do a bunch of small 3-betting, and those would be the very first hands I would take into my small bluff 3-betting range. Usually we want to play either flat or shove with 20 big blinds, but of course, and also if you play against a big fish, of course guys, if you play against a huge whale, a recreational whale that's open with 20 big blinds, fuck that here, okay? Just reshove a ton of hands if you think it's very profitable, because they're raise folding too much, they're too scared or whatever, or even you 3-bet small with aces, kings, queens, because they're barely fold against 3-bets anyway, so you get more value out of your premium hands. Against squeezes here, if we flat ace 10, ace 9 suited and we face a squeeze, we have to go broke after the pre-flop aggressor has folded. If you're not sure if the small blind big blind is wide enough, you can still call, but I would advise to just go all in against if the big blind or small blind is a reasonably good player and he reaches. Again, this is how you should play your strategy in theory. I took some of I took some exploits here, of course. So again, if you see some differences with your own studies, with your own solves, I did it because I think it makes, or it gives you a much higher EV to play such a range than just following GTO blindly. For example, ace-7 suited, I think some of the ace-10 offs would be hands you're also supposed to stack off with, but here against squeezes, I would advise to be a little bit more careful, just fold those hands. They're very, very marginal in theory. You're supposed to go broke with some of those hands against the squeeze, but I would advise just to fold unless you have the read that your opponent is a huge maniac. I think people are not aggressive enough yet. I mean, not like they're super nitty and super passive where we should start folding ace-10 suited, ace-9 suited, but definitely those marginal hands we can fold. This definitely speaks against flatting aces or kings, but we only have 20 big blinds. They don't need much protection. We always can get it in post flop, and it also benefits massively from getting the reshoves from those smaller pairs, which usually would fold if we would reshove ourselves. So we're not losing any value against hands like 9s, 8s, 7s, because if we reshove, they call anyway, and if we call, they also reshove. But by calling, we also get in those very, very low equity hands. We're in position, so we shouldn't be afraid of mixing in here some slow plays, or actually usually always slow play kings and aces. All right, let's move on. Big blind versus MP, and of course now it gets always a little bit more trickier with the squeezes. I mean, not now, but then if you start defending from cutoff. So here again, 3-bet bluff exploits, which you will never find in solver tool, because with 20 big blinds we shouldn't have a non 3-betting range at all. We still defend all suited aces, and we also defend a bunch of like 10-8 suited, 8-7 suited. Let's compare. Yeah, I mean, we don't defend king 8 suited anymore, but I would take it as a bluff. Yeah, as an exploit, as a 3-bet bluff. And here, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited, we want to do both. Of course, that's something very, very important in theory. You should look after your frequencies. If you too often, you always call ace jack off, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited. Don't get me wrong. Of course, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited is a profitable call all day long. But now if you put all the queen jack suited, jack 10 suited in your flatting range as well, you will be extremely susceptible against squeezes. That's why we shove ourselves. And also, if you look it up in a hold'em resist calculator, you will find out that also rejamming those hands is extremely profitable, and you're probably not going to gain a higher EV by flatting. So yeah, we reshove those hands. Also, king 10 suited, we're reshoving. King jack suited, we're reshoving. Otherwise, we're going to get into trouble if we flat all those hands, because then against the squeeze shove, we have to fold. We also call ace jack, ace 10 suited, 6s and 5s. If we face a squeeze, we're supposed to go broke. 5s, 6s, yeah, usually, I mean, people, since they, if we flat with 20 big blinds, they try to get it in with the pairs and a lot of suited aces and king, queen, king, suited. So with 5s and 6s, we're definitely ahead of their range, or let's say, given the odds and the dead money, we should get it in here. If you also same should be here, if you start reshoving all these hands, your calling range is not really protected. And what is a takeaway here? Think about how population plays. Do you really think they ever have those hands in range? So if someone flats with 20 big blinds, you should really go after them, especially if they have a higher VPFR gap. So as you can see, by studying those ranges, you can also make so many exploits in your own game. By the way, I also added a few notes. I'm not sure. Yeah, so for some of the ranges, you will see some notes here. Here for 5, 6s, against a player that is good enough to reshove or squeeze to the brokers, we should always go broke with 5, 5, and 6, 6 after the PFR has folded. Otherwise, we should always play, call, fold if you have tagged villain as a tight passive player. Even against fish that are playing suited broadways way to passive, we should fold 5s and 6s. Something that a solver tool is not considering. So of course we want to go broke if we know our opponent is good enough from the small blind to squeeze a hand like king, queen, king, jack, queen, jack suited. Also some of the smaller pairs. A recreational player mostly is just flatting those. He's not playing those hands aggressively. And here is where I want to encourage you to think about what to do with those borderline hands. What is my opponent doing? is he that sort of player that is playing those hands aggressively, which theory would advise him to do so? Or is he rather passive and he plays 2018 or 1917 with 4% 3-bet. You shouldn't be expecting him playing those aggressively. So you only go broke with the ace check suited, maybe even fold ace 10 suited, and then also fold 5s and 6s. That's totally fine. You're already making so much money with your yellow hands because you're going to see flops you're not supposed to see actually, because the player behind, or if there are multiple players, I mean, you're a button, so it's usually smaller than a big blind, because they're not squeezing often enough, you're going to see more flops than you're actually supposed to. So that means your equitization increases and your overall EV of every single hand increases, because they're just calling pocket fours, they're just calling queen 10 suited or king queen off, and they're actually supposed to bluff squeeze this hand and then of course stack off against us. So with a hand like king 9 suited, you're more often going to see a flop. Ace 4 suited, that's why it's so important. If you design your flatting range, it's important always to look who's sitting behind. If you have unknowns, if you play in an environment where you play against good opponents or unknowns, just stick to the ranges here for now. Use your population reads that if you think, about my opponents on my limits, they aren't squeezing those hands, then you just fold 5s and 6s, okay? That's what I'm telling you here right now. And I think this video also will take a little longer, but it's very, very important for me that you guys really use your brain and try to understand what's happening here, so that you make the best decisions possible. Of course, we will do mistakes. It's totally normal, but it's always about getting a little bit better every single day with every single decision we're making. Button versus another gun. You can see we still defend very wide. And you will be surprised why we suddenly defend a few more of these suited connectors. The reason is, again, we have the position advantage and our opponent's range is becoming more Broadway heavy, A6 heavy, so we have better realization, equity realization with those suited connectors against another gun range. Against the tight range, those hands perform better, even though we just have 20 big blinds. Be careful with 7-6 suited. It's a very, very borderline hand here. But 7-8 suited, 9-8 suited, we're definitely calling. And even 7-6 suited, and that was also a surprise to me, has a higher EV flatting against another gun range than against an MP range. Simply because, as I said, an MP range consists of more 8x and 7x hands that dominate us, but in another gun range does not have those hands in their range, so it performs a little bit better. So also here, king 10 suited, queen jack suited, we want to be reshoving, otherwise our flatting hand range gets too weak. And if here, for example, would be a huge whale in the big blind or on the blinds, I would flat because I know he's not squeezing as much as he's supposed to. Some exploits here, again, ace 2 suited would usually be a fold. So if you see this light blue color and you don't want to bluff 3-bet it because you can't exploit your opponent, you fold. Okay, very important here. These hands usually we fold. Again, we mix in a bunch of traps. So you see from the button we do a lot of trapping, and yeah, we call those hands. Also, again, probably, yeah, pretty sure it's profitable to reshove here, but against the tight the gun range, of course, the EV drops because it's more likely that he will have a hand. We're going to play in position. So you can see here, actually, if we're in position and we're short stack, we want to do way more flatting. Let's go ahead with small versus button. I mean, we just basically play a shove only strategy for 20 bigs here, and a very easy way to estimate whether you can exploit someone or not. Again, you go the open raising, and if you see, okay, someone is opening more than 40% of hands, then you start even reshoving wider than that, which means off-suited aces, king 9 off, queen 10 off, more suited connectors here, 7-6, 7-8 suited, king 5 suited, or even the suited kings are really good then. And if someone just opens 35%, you go a little tighter. Of course, the thing though is that you can't be 100% certain how much tighter you can go. If you see, okay, someone is with his 20-25 big blind stack, he's only opening 35% from the button, then just let go of these borderline hands here. King 10 off, ace 4, ace 3 off, 9 8 suited, 10 8 suited, king 6. Yeah, and let's say instead of 28%, you reshove 25%. This is already an adjustment. This is already a good adjustment. Maybe the optimal point would be reshoving 23%, but this is something we can't know. So don't be too harsh to yourself. You already make a good adjustment against him, and with your overall strategy, you're already exploiting him. Of course, we're striving for the optimal, the perfect exploit, but we barely reach it. Small blind versus cutoff, same should be here. Of course, we start reshoving tighter. Small blind versus MP. Now, since the earlier our opponent is raising from, the less EV we have with our reshoves. Yeah, with our reshoves, and that means we should incorporate a flatting range, because those hands are still strong enough to flat call. Big league of many players not flatting enough from the small blind. I have to tell you guys here, if you face a squeeze, you're fucked. So where's the problem? If we flat from the small blind, the preflop regress is supposed to defend accordingly against the squeeze. So he should treat the squeeze very often as 3-bet and defend a lot of hands against the squeeze. We are basically just having a few hands we go broke with after we call against reasonable big blind squeezing range that should consist, considering that he wants to get it in against our 20 big blind stack. He should have hands like A7 suited and the suited broadways, of course. So with the dead money involved, and probably also has some hands like Queen Jack suited, Jack 10 suited, then we should go broke with Ace 8, Ace 9 suited, Ace 10 off. However, if you're playing some tight opponent, you fold 99.5% and you only call with aces in 0.5% of the time that you trap from the small blind, which we should sometimes trap here. And then you just play call fold pretty much 100%, almost 100% of the time. But this is the highest EV strategy. Of course, if let's say the big blind is really big whale, you can even start flatting some king 6 suited, jack 8 suited type of hands, 9 7 suited type of hands, which are against good opponents are minus EV. But if the open raiser or the big blind is a big whale, a big fish, then you should go ahead and flat those hands. You can even then start flatting Jack 10 suited, Queen 10 suited. Again, you see it's the same should be over and over again. However, usually against good opponent, against a solid strategy, the reshoving has a higher EV than flatting. Okay, so keep that in mind, because very often I get the question, yeah, but Ben, King Jack suited plays so fine and isn't flatting better? No, reshoving here against a solid strategy is higher, has a higher EV. And if you're not sure what is the best strategy here, or if you can reach a higher EV by flatting, then just go ahead and reshove. Under the gun, same principle here. We again QC the same here. We flat 5-4 suited. So the tighter our ranges get, we start flatting more of these suited hands, even though we are relatively short. Let's go to cutoff versus hijack. For 20 big blinds, again, ton of reshoving, 3-bet bluff is exploit with those hands. Yeah, and those are the hands we're flatting with. We only do a little bit of flatting here. You can see actually now our ratio of having a good hand to fold against the squeeze is now much better. Hijack is still a relatively late position, so we can still do a ton of reshoving. However, again, blinds weak, open raiser weak. You can just go ahead and flat, because since your opponent is weak, you will maximize DV post flop against him. Very importantly, of course, I use these terms very generic because we do a theoretical video here. Weak, passive, whatever your opponent, you label your opponent as, you should have specific reads. Either you have shown a showdown where the guy was opening too wide or too tight. I mean, opening too tight we will not figure out, but we can figure it out based on the stats. But you should have concrete reads. What I get really mad about is if students come up with, yeah, he's weak. But ask them, what do you mean? How? Show me. And then they can't really specify by using the term weak. Where is he weak? What is he doing wrong? So you should clearly understand what your opponent is doing wrong and how you can take advantage of that. So for example, if the guy opens and he's clearly a fish, he's doing a lot of mistakes, then start flatting queen jack suited, king 10 jack, queen 10 jack 10 suited. Okay, again, it's not about, you're not going to be able to figure out 100% perfectly what you're going to do against them. No, we use this information to make a proper adjustment. It's not a perfect adjustment. This is not existing because you can't see in your opponent's brain. And if you do that over a long period of time, those better decisions will stack up and they will clearly improve your win rate. If you just follow GTO blindly and you're not trying to consider all information, your win rate will clearly deteriorate compared to someone that uses all those information. Sometimes we have to stick to our standard game because we have plenty of table. We're a little tired, but that's all right. This is a different aspect of the game. Then we talk about the mindset and how strong our B game is. But I'm repeating that because, guys, you can't imagine how many questions I get. I see people doing that over and over, doing that wrong over and over again. So that's something I have to push into your brain so hard until you will be so pissed by me repeating that over and over. I would like to come to you at your home, wake you up 5 a.m. in the morning and tell you that shit over and over again until you really hate me so much, because it's just so important for pre-flop fundamentals. And first of all, making these adjustments, but also secondly, also being okay with understanding, okay, I can't play this range 100% perfectly. I just try to make small adjustments based on my opponents, or against certain opponents, bigger adjustments. Versus MP, of course, then now cutoff versus MP, cutoff versus UTG. You can see here we're not defending those suited connectors anymore. Something I still see a lot of players doing, flatting way to right now from cutoff, and you will see here cutoff versus MP, cutoff versus UTG. We get very, very tight. We're not even flatting king 10 suited anymore, queen 10 suited, folding also the suited aces. Yeah, we're not even calling ace check off and king queen off anymore. I would very often use this hand as a small 3-bet. I think that looks insanely strong with your 20 big blind stock, just a small 3-bet. I think you will get a lot of credit. And you see hijack versus MP, we get even tighter. Hijack versus UTG, MP versus UTG, UTG 1 versus UTG. Here, UTG 1 versus UTG alternative. I would like to show you a really nice strategy you can play as well. This counts for this position, UTG 1 versus UTG, as well as you can also use it for MP versus UTG or UTG versus UTG. So basically against a tight opening range, and we're still in a relatively early position. What are we doing here is we mainly 3-bet our entire range, apart from a few hands. King queen suited, ace check suited, 50% king check suited, and aces. The rest we 3-bet call, we go broke, or we jam, or we 3-bet fold with 20 big blinds. So yes, it has the disadvantage that we probably have to go broke with a hand like nines here, which we would be probably be flatting here very often. Yep. Because yeah, I mean, we 3-bet to 5 big blinds if he jams. If he has the ace queens and ace kings, we just have to stack off. If we face a 4-bet shove, it's different. So these only treats the situations when the preflop aggressor 4-bets, does not cover cold 4-bets. But it has the huge advantage that we protect hands like ace 10 suited, king jack suited, pocket eights, also pocket nines, pocket tens. Because if we flat and the whole table overcalls, it's going to be very, very difficult to play. So we just 3-bet small. We basically try to get the pot heads up, and we have a much easier decision if we face a 4-bet jam with a bunch of our hands. So I think that's a really strong strategy. because we have a lot of these hands that play very well heads up, but they play not so well multi-way. And a strategy you can use, you can also use that strategy where you do more flatting, as you can see here. Or you can use that strategy, and you can even apply that for MP versus Under the Gun, or what else? Yeah, mainly versus for the UTG versus UTG positions, or MP versus UTG. I think a very, very powerful alternative. Depends a little bit on what you prefer. If you feel very comfortable playing 3-bet pots, if you don't feel so comfortable playing with these hands multi-way and you're very often lost, try it out. Also a very good strategy, let's say, against weaker opponents that have a very low fold to 3-bet, because they will still call hands that are not supposed to be called. So suited aces and suited broadways and king, queen, ace, jack type of hands, and they don't really know what to do, and you can really punish them hard for overcalling. And of course, you still have some fold equity and the opportunity to take down the pot pre-flop, which with a hand like 8s or ace 10 suited, you're actually aiming for.